So let's think back for a second. Before we had all these fancy webhooks and streaming APIs, how did applications actually find out about new data without just constantly smashing the refresh button on a server? Well, the answer lies in this really foundational but still super powerful pattern, the web feed. We're going to dive into this original pull-based API and see why it is still incredibly relevant for us as developers today.
Here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll nail down exactly what a web feed is and the problem it was designed to solve. Then, we'll put the two big formats, RSS and Atom, head-to-head. After that, we'll walk through a real code example of how to build one. And finally, we'll wrap up by looking at where they're used today and, importantly, the risks you need to watch out for.
All right, let's start with the fundamentals. What in the world is a web feed, and what architectural headache was it really meant to cure?
I mean, imagine a world without notifications. Seriously, to see if your favorite site had posted something new, you'd have to physically go to the site and then check again and again. It's just wildly inefficient, right? For you and for the server getting hammered with all those requests. This is the exact problem web feeds were invented to fix.
And this diagram, it just perfectly lays out the solution. Over on the left, you've got your client. Think of it as a feed reader app. And every so often, it just asks, hey, got anything new? On the right, the server responds with a simple XML file that lists all the latest updates. The crucial thing here is that the server isn't shouting at everyone. The client pulls the data when it's ready. It's a classic pull-based API.
So here's the key takeaway. A web feed is really just a data format. It's a structured XML document, which is just a way to organize data in a text file that gives you a list of new content. For us as developers, it's best to just think of it as a simple pull-based API that lets our apps discover data asynchronously.
Okay, so now that we get the why, let's dig into the what of web syndication, which is really just the fancy term for spreading content around. You're going to run into two main formats out there, RSS and Atom. First up is the original, RSS. It stands for really simple syndication, and honestly, the structure is pretty straightforward. You've got your main RSS tag, a single channel that holds all the metadata about the feed itself, like the title and description, and then you have a bunch of item elements. Each item is one piece of content, like a blog post or an article.
And then we have Atom. This came along a bit later, and it was specifically designed to fix some of the vague parts of RSS. The structure feels similar, but you'll notice the terms are different. The main tag is feed, and instead of items, you have entry elements. But look closer. You've got required fields like ID and updated, which right away makes the whole thing more structured and way more reliable.
Now this is where it gets really interesting for us. When you compare them, you see RSS kind of suffered from having a bunch of different versions out there, which can be a real pain when you're trying to parse it. Atom, on the other hand, is a proper IETF standard, RFC 4287 to be exact. It was built from day one to be extensible, it uses a standardized date format, thank goodness, and it has much better support for things like Unicode. Honestly, for any new project, Atom is the technically superior choice, no question.
All right, theory is great, but let's actually see how this works in the real world. We're going to build a quick Atom feed using the Django web framework.
Okay, step one, we have to define our API endpoints. In this Django URLs file, we're setting up two routes. The first one, /forecast_feed, that's our endpoint for the Atom feed itself. The second one, /forecast/UUID/city_UUID, that's the URL for the actual content that each entry in our feed is going to link back to. Simple enough?
Next up, we create the view that actually does all the heavy lifting. Think of this City Atom Feed View class as a translator. It takes our raw data from the database on the left, and using Django's built-in tools, it maps that data into a feed. The items method is what grabs the data, and then other methods like item link tell Django exactly how to turn each of those objects into a structured entry for our final XML file.
And voila! This is the result. When a client hits our /forecast/feed endpoint with a GET request, that Django view we just looked at kicks in and spits out this perfectly structured Atom 1.0 XML document. It's completely ready to go.
And here we are, the final piece of the puzzle, what the end user actually sees. This is what it looks like inside a feed reader. In this case, it's a cool command line tool called Newsboat. It just grabs our XML, parses it, and gives the user a clean, simple list of updates. The whole journey, from the database all the way to the user screen, is complete.
Okay, so we know what they are, we know how to build them, but let's be real, why should a professional developer today care about what seems like old tech?
Because they are still absolutely critical infrastructure. We're not just talking about blogs. All the major cloud providers, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, they all use feeds to publish their service status updates. Cybersecurity agencies like CISA use them to push out time-sensitive threat alerts. And of course, there's still the entire backbone of the podcasting ecosystem. This stuff is serious business.
The architectural benefits are just so clear. It is a fantastic one-to-many broadcasting system. For users, the ability to aggregate is the killer feature. You can pull all your trusted sources into one single dashboard. And from a privacy angle, since a lot of readers don't even need a login, it cuts down on how much personal data is being tracked and collected by big platforms.
But it's not all perfect. There are some major trade-offs. For one, there's no contract. A provider can just abandon a feed tomorrow with no warning. From a business point of view, feeds can actually be a problem because they might keep users off your platform, which hurts engagement metrics and ad revenue. And most importantly, they definitely introduce security risks.
Now, the number one security risk for any developers consuming a feed is content injection. It's basically a three-step attack. First, an attacker manages to get a malicious script into the content that's going to be published in the feed. Second, your application pulls that feed down and without properly sanitizing the content, gets it ready to display. Finally, when that content gets rendered to your user, the malicious script executes in their browser. It's a classic cross-site scripting attack, or XSS, and it's a huge vulnerability.
Which brings us to a final big picture question. You know, web feeds represent this open, decentralized way of sharing information. But we live in a world that is completely dominated by centralized, walled garden platforms. So you have to wonder, what is the future for these simple, powerful, and open protocols in the web of tomorrow?